I'm honored to be joined by Douglas Burdett, the host of the Marketing Book podcast. And first and foremost, please get on it, subscribe, because it's amazing. And if anything else, just enjoy his dry humor and his love of scotch. But we're on the Marketing Study Lab podcast right now, and I like to start with a funny opener for all my guests. So Douglas, my funny opener for you is, when you put a book down, do you use a bookmark, fold a page, or use the closest thing to hand?
That's a very interesting question, one I've never had before, but I actually have an answer for that. And that is because because I get to read a book, at least one book a week, to prepare for each weekly interview. What I do is I have a stack of books over there of the upcoming books. And off of each one, on the cover is a Post-it note with the date of the interview on it. So I stack them all up chronologically. Then, before I go home for the weekend, I grab the one on top of the stack, because that's the one I need to read that weekend, and I use that Post-it note as the bookmark. And I do that because the Post-it notes don't tend to fall out. But I'm also known for my marketing book podcast, Bookmarks. So I'll be sending you one, and if anyone else would like one, please let me know, and I'll send one your way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do quite a bit of whiteboarding, and when I get things like that, I usually stick it on there. So when I do a video, things around there, but obviously that's going to have more of a practical use than a sticker or something like that. So definitely, I look forward to receiving that. Brilliant. Glad I asked that question now.
Yes, see, you're benefiting. And then if anyone else wants one, they just need to connect with me on LinkedIn and share their mailing address, and it's all theirs. I'll even put a little something extra in there.
Oh, brilliant. Marvelous.
A marketing book laptop sticker, but it doesn't have to go on your laptop.
Cool. Well, send me one of them and that will go on the whiteboard.
Oh, excellent. All right. This is really coming together for me.
Brilliant. Love it. Let's get into it now. So what's the story that brings you to this point in your career?
Well, I have been in the agency business for just over 30 years now. And I was in the Army, U.S. Army in Germany for 3 years after I was finished at school, and then got out and studied business, and then decided I want to go into advertising. And so was there for a number of years, and then I met my wife, and our son was born there, and we ultimately moved to Virginia and worked in an agency for 4 years, and then started my own shop. And the story is that I was always traditional advertising. In fact, when I was in grad school, after I was out of the Army, I started looking around for a different career. And a friend of mine I'd been in the Army with, who lived in New York City, he said, you ought to think about going into advertising. And I didn't know much about it. So I went to a professor who had worked in advertising. I said, what's one book I could read? And she recommended one by a famous Scotsman, David Ogilvy.
Oh, right. Okay.
And Ogilvy on Advertising. And that was one of two books that really transformed the trajectory of my career. So I did that for many years. And even when I started my own firm, it was an advertising firm. But as a lot of your listeners will know, the advertising industry is a shadow of its former self. And so I started to realize that whole world was kind of going away. Probably like a travel agent 20 years ago, thinking, how can they make travel plans without me? So I went back to what I was doing in grad school, where I was reading a bunch of different books and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I stumbled upon a book called The New Rules of Marketing and PR by David Meerman Scott. It was the first edition. It came out the same year as the iPhone that was introduced, which I think was 2009. And that was the other book that just transformed it, where I said, that's where the whole world is going. Now I understand. I felt like I had a second bite at the apple. I transformed my business towards that world, away from advertising. We buy hardly any advertising now for clients. And at that point, I was so troubled by starting to feel irrelevant, or like I was growing dinosaur scales, that I said, I'm not going to stop reading these books. I have to do something to feel like I'm kind of keeping up, because the velocity of change in this industry has really picked up and continues to do so. So I kept reading the books, and then you probably have a lot of signed sports memorabilia from the members of the Liverpool Football Club. I don't, but I collect autograph sales and marketing books. And so I would go to a conference, and I would have already read their book on a electronic device, but I'd buy a copy of the book and I would put it in the suitcase, fly to the conference just because I knew I could get their autograph. So after a while, I started listening to podcasts, and I always liked marketing podcasts, particularly books where particularly episodes where they would interview authors. So I said, I want to try that. I basically started the podcast that I wanted to listen to, which was interviewing authors of marketing and sales books. And so after about the first 10 interviews, I'd read all those books. Only at that point, Peter, did I realize I was actually going to need to read every book for each interview. So it was like taking the wrong exit on a interstate, or I don't know what you call it there, motorway or something like that in the UK, and realizing, okay, I wish I'd thought that through. So at any rate, and yes, it has cut into my Scotch drinking. So that's kind of where I am. So now I started, over 5 years ago, and I've had 260 something interviews, and the podcast has been named by LinkedIn and Forbes as one of the top sales and marketing podcasts. And I do it kind of like your show, just because I love doing it. I've got a separate business on the side, and I try not to spend too much time during the work week working on it. I read the books, on the weekends, but I do it just because I still get excited at being able to read these books. And sorry about that.
That's okay.
I'm being a bad podcast guest. Hang on. Somebody's coming to the door. If somebody could get that. So anyway, that's how I got to where I am, and I hope that's the longest answer I have to your question. So, at any rate, and I have lots. I know you have a lot of listeners in the UK, and can you answer it and let them in? Thanks. And the second largest number of listeners I have is in the UK, and of course I interview a lot of. I get the honor and privilege of interviewing a lot of folks in the UK. In fact, this tomorrow, as we record today, tomorrow I interview the interview I did with Rory Sutherland, who's the vice chairman of Ogilvy in the UK. Mm-hmm. His interview will publish about his book Alchemy.
Wow, that's cool. Love it. Absolutely love it. That leads me nicely onto my next question.
So I hope we still have time for your other questions you might ask.
Yeah, it does. But I've ticked loads of them off. So pretty much all of them are about Scotch now. So
yeah, I have so much to learn. And in answer to your unasked question, I always get this: what's your favorite Scotch? Mm-hmm. The best tasting Scotch is free Scotch.
I think that's the dry humor coming through, which is just amazing. So
I apologize.
That's absolutely fine. No worries.
Normally I'd say we'd edit that out, but I know you're doing this live, so.
Yeah, it's live, but this will stay in the video, okay, and then maybe in the podcast we'll change it or do something.
No problem.
Look, authenticity. What can you say?
Yes, there you go.
Absolutely. But what we've been talking about leads me nicely on to my next question. And when you were practicing marketing, and I know you still do, but when you started and you're agency based, you started reading books, and then you've got a podcast about books. We have a lot of information at our fingertips. Why did you decide to focus on sales and marketing books and not just, say, successful marketers?
Well, I guess because, as I mentioned before, I had read these books, and, the right book at the right time can have a dramatic effect. I mean, a lot of people can probably think back on a book they would have read, not just necessarily a business book, but some book that really had an impact on them. And I think that I got in the habit of reading them after I got out of the Army, and it was actually before the World Wide Web came about. So this was in the late 80s. So I would, we didn't have this thing you kids call email and the internets. So I would read a book about a different line of work and then go talk to people in that and see, kind of what that was all about. So I was used to turning to books to read them. And I'd been an English major, so I guess I had read a fair number of books. So that's how I did that. Is I just remember reading it and thinking, this is really helpful to me, and that's why I focused on the books. But also, the thing with books is that it's such an immersive experience. It's like you're spending a few hours with that author,
Mm-hmm.
or it's like you're going away and getting deeply into that, whatever the subject matter is, particularly, hopefully it's a well-written book, and almost all the books that are on my show are really very well written. And there's a quote from Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg, this guy that started Facebook, another one of these kids. And he started a book club the same year that I started the Marketing Book Podcast. He wanted to be like me, of course.
Of course.
And he said, books allow you to fully explore a topic and immerse yourself in a deeper way than most media today. And it's interesting because when I'm reading a book, or when an author, what happens now, I don't know if you can see it, but back behind me, there's a couple hundred books, and there's other stacks over there. In fact, all this interruption we've had is because somebody kept wanting to get through the lobby to bring another package of books up here. So sorry about that.
It's behind the scenes.
Yes,
Live
that's
behind
right.
the scenes.
That's right. And these folks actually have work to do. So why was I saying that? I get all these books now. I've forgotten what I was saying, but you can really, I don't, when somebody wants to be on the podcast, or, when somebody, so my point is that now almost every day there's people sending books, which is, I'm delighted, which is funny, because when I started the podcast, I wasn't sure that 52 marketing books would be written every year. That was my seriously, that's what I thought. Wow. Oh gosh, I'm going to be scraping, but there are, evidently. And then I started reading I started interviewing authors of sales books, which I think are very important for marketing people to read, almost more than so many marketing books exclusively. But I have to have a hard copy of the book. And I look at it, and then, because I'm going to read the book, I'm going to mark it up, all that sort of thing. It's very rare that I'll read an electronic version, and I've only listened to one audiobook, and that was Joe Pulizzi's book, which was a murder mystery. He's the founder of the Content Marketing Institute. And even in that interview, which aired recently, we didn't talk so much about the book because it's a mystery and we didn't want to give it all away.
Yeah.
But we did talk quite a bit about content marketing. So, and that's why I read the books. They just, if I read something on a screen, I know there's some science behind this. I can't remember what it is. You tend to scan more. I just don't retain the information as if I'm reading it. But
I suppose because our brains are susceptible to, when we're on a screen, that's what we're kind of doing through emails and short messages, and it's easy to scan.
So. Yeah. Maybe it's that we're trained to do that. I mean, people don't really read on a screen the same way. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's why cave drawings work better on a screen.
So that episode you're talking about, I actually listened to it, bizarrely enough, yesterday. And I think his murder mystery book is about some kind of agency, a marketing agency, I think.
Yes. A guy whose father passed away, and his father was in the mortuary business, the funeral business. And he gets pulled into this, it's a murder mystery, conspiracy. It was pretty exciting. But what happened was, and it's an interesting story for content marketers, Joe said that normally when an author releases a book, there's a print version, an electronic version, and maybe an audio version at the same time. But what Joe wanted to do is build his audience more, which is what a lot of companies have done. They've built an audience before they try and sell to them. So he's released his audiobook, the 8-hour audiobook, for free on iTunes. It's called The Will to Die. So if you like that sort of thing, you should listen to it. The electronic version's coming out in the spring of 2020, and then in the summer of 2020, the print version. Well, when that happens, he's going to remove the free audio version, but he's trying to build his audience first. So he's doing it in the reverse order, but I think it's a very interesting content marketing approach. So he said, hey, how about if I come back on? I said, yeah, I'd love to have you. You'll be one of the very few members of the Marketing Group Podcast Four Timers Club, because he's written several other content marketing books. Mm-hmm. And so we did that. And I said, okay, well, can you send me the book? He goes, it doesn't exist yet. I mean, it's all on audio. I said, okay. So I listened to it. But even then, it was a different experience for me. I don't listen to these on audiobook because you have to pay too much attention. It's just easier to read the book for me. I don't know. I'm sorry. There's probably some very smart scientists listening that you have in your audience that might be able to help us understand why it is retained better that way.
it would be interesting to know as well. I just want to move on a little bit, and I've got a quote here from David Packard of Hewlett and Packard, and he stated once that marketing is too important to be left just to the marketing department, which I absolutely agree with. But on the same respect, I've always found it difficult, or companies that I've worked for found it difficult to encourage others to get involved in the marketing process.
Mm-hmm.
How can we get others or encourage others to get involved in that marketing process and show the value that marketing can bring?
Well, let me mention a book, because did I mention I read these books? So you got to cut me off at some point, because I'm going to say, oh, there was another book. Oh, there was
Sure.
this book. Yeah, I love writing book prescriptions for people, because I don't expect them to read hundreds of them if I can suggest one or two that might help them right now. But there was a book called The 12 Powers of a Marketing Leader, and it was by Thomas Barta and Patrick Barwise. Patrick Barwise teaches at London Business School, and Barta, who lives in Cologne, was a McKinsey partner, and it was this study using a lot of McKinsey data about perceptions of marketers. And they interviewed a lot of marketers, and then a lot of people had hired marketers and worked for them, or were colleagues or for other departments. And they talked about how the most successful, well, first off, the marketers have an image problem, which we can talk about later, but the most successful marketers are those that have this certain kind of leadership skill. And it doesn't mean commanding a platoon of soldiers. It means a leadership of walking the halls and helping to reveal to their colleagues what is possible now with modern marketing, and also why marketing has gone from plastic surgery to internal medicine. In other words, it used to be the make it pretty department, and now it has a whole lot to do. It has a whole lot to do with the experience that your customers have, and how that's really your most powerful form of marketing. So they're helping to reveal, and they do it in many ways. They'll show what the competition's doing. They'll help their colleagues to understand that the megaphone that we've used for 100 years is pretty much broken and nobody trusts it. They trust their colleague, they trust their friends, and they even trust recommendations from strangers more than they trust what a company says. So wow. One of the things that helps the most is to show what your competition's doing. But if you're going to be successful, you need to be the first to do it. So as Seth Godin says, if you're waiting for a case study, you're going to be too late. One of the other things that marketers can do to help themselves to show their leadership and to show the relevance is to tie as much as what they do to business goals. So, and I give this talk all the time, and afterwards I gave it not too long ago, and one of the guys came up to me, very sharp guy, and he says, "Yeah, it's so true. We're known as the trade show guys. We help the company prepare for the trade shows, and these are smart people, but what they want to do, or what you should try to do, is connect what you're doing with what your company's trying to accomplish." Now, a lot of people will say, "Yeah, but my company doesn't have any goals." Help them develop some. They're not expecting that from a marketing person. But those are the types of things where, at the top of the idea here is there's more and more companies that are starting to make people the CEOs who have a marketing background, because they understand which levers to pull to start growing revenue. In other words, marketers have to know a whole lot more about why people buy, and they have to know more about sales. They have to know about customer experience that's being engineered or provided. And so that's why some of the more progressive companies are starting to realize that it really is about marketing. What one of the things he was talking about, David Packard was talking about, is if you're abdicating it to your marketing department, you're really going to struggle. So it also brings to mind the quote from the 20th century management expert, I would say guru, but I so disdain that word as it relates to marketing. And his name is I just had it, Peter Drucker.
Yeah.
And he says, business, if a business is there to create customers, there's really only two things they need to be focusing on: innovation and marketing. Everything else is just a cost. And now he was maybe being a little provocative, and in Mark Schaefer's recent book, Lessons, that was on the podcast, he talks about that. But, marketing, for folks that may be new to it, and this is something that always surprises folks when I talk about it, is like in 1960, there was a model called the 4 Ps of marketing, which you may have heard of. And is it outdated? Sure. Has every marketing expert come up with the 4 As or the 4 Qs or whatever? Yeah, fine. But this one still works because most companies don't have this framework. And marketing is about your product and how it's priced and how it's distributed, meaning place. Only then should you be focusing on promotion. And so it short circuits so many companies I'll speak to. They'll say, hey, we need some marketing. And I say, okay, well, let's talk about some of these other things first. And it's like, I think marketing is actually going to hurt you. You guys actually have some other things you need to focus on first. The other thing is did I mention there's another book? There was a book called Beyond Product that was on the show by Jill Soley. And she and her co-author are Silicon Valley marketing veterans. And there's a reason they called it Beyond Product, because so many people in that world, the tech world, but also most business, they're really focused on their product. They love talking about their product. And she's dealt with very smart Silicon Valley founders who basically have the frustration of, we've got this great product. Why are we not minting money? And then she's having to explain to people there's this thing called product market fit. Did you test it all for that? And it's easy for us to sit here and say that. I can understand why these founders do that, but it was that sort of thing where, you might want to put the brakes on making a bunch of noise until you make sure you have some of these other things first.
Mm-hmm. So it's clear that there is a requirement in every single business for some form of marketing or marketer or some assistance within that department. Last year, you were the keynote speaker at the AMA, American Marketing Association. And you said, which you touched on a couple of points there, and I'm glad.
And that was in Birmingham, Alabama, which was named after Birmingham, England.
Love it. Bit of knowledge there.
Yeah, all this useless information is right up here in my head. Don't try and take me on in Trivial Pursuit, but for really important information, I'm at a loss.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, in that keynote speech, you said that marketers have a serious image problem. So why is this, and how can we actually fix it?
Well, let's go to a survey that was done by the Fournaise Group in London a few years ago, and it was 80% of CEOs did not trust their marketing people. And what they meant by that is that, they would trust them to watch their kids probably, but they didn't trust that marketers are in touch with the financial realities of their company. And just to quote, let me quote it from that same book, 12 Powers of a Marketing Leader. Mark Ritson, who is based in London, he said, they said, early in our study, we spoke with international CMOs about their work, asking, what do you do? It was interesting how many people answered. Some said things like, I manage the brand, or I run our marketing. Words like these don't go down well with company leaders. In the words of marketing professor and columnist Mark Ritson, too many marketers go into a room full of executives from their company and warble on about the need to build brand awareness and brand equity. No one gives a F except you, and presumably you're already on board. Good marketers work out how to link what they do with what other stakeholders within the organization want: employee retention, improved profits, clearer leadership. And the warble word, I thought that was a very good UK word because we don't use it too much here in the United States. So there are the way to get out of that is to do what they said in that very book, get in the revenue camp, kind of like I was touching on earlier. And that's where you start to ask questions that are not expected of a lot of marketing people, but you start asking questions like, what are our company financial goals? A lot of marketers work for companies that have those, but they're not thinking about them, or they haven't asked, or they haven't been told. Go to your CFO, your chief financial officer, or whoever, and say, what kind of goals do we have? And they may not have any. So then you can start to exert some leadership and help to establish some. What are our company sales goals? If you have salespeople, I got to believe they have some sort of quotas. Okay, where did those quotas come from? At some point, your company, to use a military analogy, has said, take that hill. And the marketers don't even know which hill it is.
Yeah.
Another way is to say, who is our most profitable customer? I ask that question of companies that I interact with, and a lot of them, they go, wow, that's a good question. Well, but it's like, well, why don't you focus on maybe selling more to your current customers to get the fastest revenue growth? Or here's another one. I'll say, who are our worst customer? Who are our most least profitable customers? And quite often companies are able to say that pretty quickly. I say, okay, well, what characteristics do they have? Why are they not good for us? And then you can start to go to the other end of the continuum and say, well, who are the ones that are ideal? And then companies start dreaming like, wow, you mean we might be able to fire some of our bad customers and get more of the good ones? Here's another one that every marketer should have a handle on, is what is the average lifetime value of our best customers? Everyone thinks about making that first sale, but a customer might be worth 10 times that first sale. And this is, again, I see light bulbs go off over people's heads when I talk about this. I say, okay, so in other words, every customer you bring in here is worth $500,000 or whatever the number is. And they go, gosh, I didn't think of it that way. You get a new customer, you get yourself an annuity for however long you tend to keep these folks, as well as other things. So get in the revenue camp, start speaking the language of business, which is accounting. Here's another thing that marketers should not do. I know I'm going to upset some marketers here, but don't start using the word brand or branding. Don't say these words to civilians, okay, outside the marketing part. Brands, branding, storytelling. Don't talk about likes, impressions. Keep that to yourself. Just do yourself a favor and don't do that, because so many people think of marketers as arts and crafts party planners who work in the make it pretty department. And these might be nice people. They just don't know what marketing does. But they think, yeah, whatever you're doing, that's great. I still have a quota to meet.
I love that phrase, arts and crafts. I think it sums it up perfectly for people that might not necessarily understand what marketing is, and it highlights what marketing fundamentally isn't.
Right. Let me give you another example. Who is Liverpool's greatest opponent, biggest rival?
So let's go with Manchester United.
Okay, Manchester United. Ooh, man. And didn't you say Liverpool just beat them?
Thanks for bringing that up.
This?
Yeah, they did, yeah.
Okay, so let's say you get together with a bunch of Manchester United folks and they know you're from Liverpool, you're a Liverpool fan. There are certain things they're thinking about you. They might not even like you. Now, if they got to know you, that'd be fine. But you see how their perception of you is probably not good just because you're a Liverpool fan. It's the same thing. They say, oh, they work in marketing. It's like, okay, my hunch is that there's probably a lot of really, really nice Manchester United fans. I know you'll disagree, but
no, hang on, no.
I'm kidding. But right off the bat, and it's the same here in the United States with this with the NFL. I've got a friend who just despises his favorite team's opponent, and I'm thinking, really? He goes, oh no, they're bad people. They, it doesn't stop. So it's like that. These people think of you that way. Yeah. It's the same way with people who aren't marketing. They just think, oh, yeah, okay, great. That's fun. It's creative. And they think of marketing, as my colleague Pete has mentioned the other day, they think of marketing as buying some sort of lottery ticket. Like, oh, let's take a chance. Let's try a little something. Maybe something will go viral, which is a terrible strategy that never works and is the bane of marketers. It's such a bad idea. And we can talk more about that. But rather, marketing is more like building a pyramid, where I'm not talking about slave labor, but I'm talking about, it's a series of small things you need to do. It's slow and steady wins the race. It's that sort of thing that gives you a real sustainable edge. It's like building a moat around a castle. I have to use a reference that people in the UK will understand. And I joke because Mark Masters, he was the first author I interviewed on the show about his book, The Content Revolution. No, wait, I can't remember. I'm sorry. He's going to kill me now. But he had in the book a lot of references to castles. And I had to say, is it required by law that if you're a UK author, you do have to talk about kings and castles and, a feudal system and all that sort of thing. And he said, "Oh yeah, yeah, it is." He was also the only author who, so far, was drinking during the interview. So he's a he's a hoot, and I've encouraged all the other authors to do that. But yeah, so that's why that's kind of what they think of that. Sorry, let me excuse me while I get down off my soapbox.
That's cool. No, I love that. Mark's actually been on the show. He was one of the first guests. Actually, I was amazed. He came on like I'm amazed you're here today. But he's so outspoken. But the beauty of Mark Ritson is, I've called him beautiful. The beauty of Mark Ritson is the fact that whatever he says, he can back up, he can justify, and that's the best thing.
Yeah, he's a treasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going back to books and all the books you've actually read over the years, has there been a change in style of writing, or has it remained like fairly consistent?
I don't know. This may have always been this way, but I've seen a few more books lately that have fables in them, which I find very interesting. And this is not a new thing. I mean, people might argue that something like the Bible, it's full of stories, compelling stories to get a point across. So I don't think this is a new idea. But there have been some where the authors, it's either like the whole book is a fable, like The Go-Giver by Bob Berg, or Be Like Amazon, even a lemonade stand can do it, by the Eisenberg brothers, where the whole thing is like that, which is very interesting. And Oren Klaff had a new one called, oh gosh, he's going to kill me. He wrote Pitch Anything, and then his other book had a lot of stories in it. And so there was another one I really liked called Smash the Funnel by these two fellas friends of mine who have an agency in Philadelphia. And what they did is they wrote the book and then they rewrote it before the first one came out. Although I saw the first one. In between every chapter, they had the fable. So you were able to see what they were explaining, and then they took you through this story throughout the whole book. And it was about 100 extra pages, but it was brilliantly done. So I would hope that there are more books in the future that have these fables. And there was another book, a graphic novel by Rich Horwath. He was on the show, and it was like 170 pages of a graphic novel, and it was all about business strategy. And I just told him, I said, you've just made it so difficult for anyone else who's going to do this, because it's very difficult and very expensive to do one of those. But he did it, and it was really compelling. And he said, yeah, I was hoping to make it difficult for everyone else. Plus, you really have to know what you're talking about if you put it in a graphic novel.
Yeah,
it was called Strategy Man versus the Anti-Strategy Squad.
Wow, weird title as well.
Yeah, well, it was these. It was Strategy Man, who was the superhero, and he had two other superheroes, and then there were 20. I think it was 20 villains, and these 20 villains are things that ruin strategy for a business, and they could be things like bad meetings or all these different kinds of things. And it's as if I'd seen a movie on every one of those villains, because I knew exactly what he was talking about. He personified all these things that derail companies from pursuing a strategy. And the reason you want to have a strategy is because you'll be more successful doing that.
Absolutely. Just sticking with books, and you read a lot of them. How do you get the best out of actually reading a book? What are your hints and tips? Because you pretty much read a book a week. So like, what's your tips for doing that on a consistent basis?
Well, if you drink scotch while you're reading, it really goes quickly.
Yeah.
But I have to reread the ending because I will have forgotten it by the time I get to that. I think you do have to choose carefully. We've gone from an era of space to one of attention where, if you're not reading a book, you could be watching an interesting cat video or, just doing something else that commands our attention, because we can basically do whatever we want. So I would say, choose carefully. And I think that's where a podcast like mine is helpful, or many other places where you can read reviews online. You can listen to an author talk. You can, just research it. I would also say, try to make a plan for what you want to learn more about. So it's like sometimes people will say, what's one book I could read to learn more about marketing? And I could recommend a book, but it's sort of like, well, what what are your specific challenges? So like every day I'm messaged by listeners from around the world who are looking for a book recommendation because they're trying to save time, and I want to help them because I've already navigated, a little bit further than they have on some of these things. And they'll ask me some questions, but I usually have to ask a follow-up question like, well, let's be more specific because I want to make sure that I recommend the right one. So think about what it is you want to do. You can also join a book club. There's a lot of book clubs. I think there's even online book clubs. I think for nonfiction books, you can certainly check out, almost every author has a blog where you can read more about what they're doing. You can watch talks they've given to see if that's the itch that you want to scratch. And the other thing that's helpful in reading a book is to kind of make it a habit. So people say, well, how do you read so many books? And I say, well, it's kind of a priority. In other words, if people say you don't have time for something, it really just means it's not a priority, which is fine. I mean, my kids are in their 20s now. It's not like I'm having to watch them. They should probably be watching me at this point, but so I have the time to do it, but it's just more of a priority. So instead of watching maybe as much television or doing other kinds of things during my week, there's a couple times where I sit down for a couple hours and read them. So I'll read for an hour or two on Saturday, maybe on Sunday, and then a couple mornings a week for an hour, like before I go to work or something like that. If I need to get through it. So if you can, it's like anything, if you can make it a habit, that's good. And I think if you could just read 12, if you make 12 to a year, you would still be way ahead of most folks. So also, what you could do is you could organize a book club, like with your colleagues at work or whatever group you're in. Like if you're in a local marketing association or whatever, set up a book club. For instance, they're at Salesforce.com in London. A lot of folks work there and they listen to the podcast. And so they set up a book club for all these people that work there. And when they first started it, they had me Skype in, just to kind of help out. And I was delighted to do it. And it was a whole lot of fun. And I'm happy to do that for any of your listeners who might want to do that.
Brilliant.
To get them started. So that's kind of how you have to be careful. But it's a good question because we're so overwhelmed with all these options for our attention.
Yeah. Speaking of all the options and different elements and things you've learned in a lot of reading, one of your recent episodes, you ran through, and the title I think was 3 Big Ideas from 250 Marketing and Sales Books Every Marketer Needs to Know. So what are these 3 big ideas we need to know?
Okay. The first one we've talked about, marketers have an image problem. And I can include a link to the episode. It was episode 251 where I gave this talk, but it also includes all the slides and script.
Cool.
So your listeners can have all that and they don't need to register. They just click on it and download it and it's all theirs. So one of them is marketers have an image problem. And the sooner that you acknowledge that, the more successful you're going to be. It doesn't mean that you are an arts and crafts party planner. Just understand that and try to get into the revenue camp in what you do. So we've talked about that. So there's no need to beat that dead horse anymore. The second one is that the most successful companies, the most successful marketers have the deepest insights into their customers. Okay, now what that means is not that they call their customers up and say, what do you want? It's a 100% wrong approach. It means that you observe your customers and you have a little bit of empathy, which is the most important word in marketing and sales. And it's also the most difficult thing for humans to have. And empathy is not some sorrow, compassion, pity. It's putting yourself in the shoes of someone else. And you don't have to be perfect at that. Even if you're just a little bit good at it, you'll be more successful than your competition. So you observe them. It's like Amazon. They're obsessed with observing their customers and how to remove friction from their customers' lives if they can possibly help with that. So that's where if you pay enough attention to your customers, they're going to tell you what they want, or they're going to reveal how you can be more successful. But it's a matter of doing that. And the problem is that, as I said in the talk, there's three kinds of companies, really. The companies that are focused on themselves and their products and their operations, which I think is most companies,
Yeah.
or at least the majority. And then there's some companies that are focused primarily on their competition. It doesn't mean they're not focused on themselves and their operations and all that, and they won't admit this, but their strategic decisions are based on whatever the competition's doing, monkey see, monkey do, that sort of thing. And then there's the smaller number of companies that are really focused on their customers. And Amazon's an example of that, where they're just, I think Bezos, let's see, I got the quote here. He says, "Our number one conviction and idea and philosophy and principle is customer obsession as opposed to competitor obsession." So that's where buyer personas come in handy and all that type of thing. And the third thing is that as I mentioned earlier, the most powerful marketing that companies have now is the experience that their customers have interacting with them. So you can see how that's a challenge for marketers because they're not in control of that customer experience. That's where we go back to David Packard's thing. His quote about marketing is too important to be left to the marketing department. It really needs to be whoever's in charge, making sure that people have a good experience. So you've heard of mystery shoppers, or if you're able to sit down and say, well, no, what actually happens when a customer interacts with us? Again, back to empathy, you're able to say, wait a minute, we're making them sit on hold for 4 minutes. Ooh, gosh, did nobody notice that? Or there's just certain things where they are having a bad experience. So the more successful companies are saying, oh, well, tell you what, let's engineer it so that people don't have that bad experience. For instance, where I live, there's a heating and air conditioning company that I'm a customer. And when you have to buy a new unit, which is maybe every 10 years or something, if they schedule a day to install it, you have to take off work and you have to be there while they're putting it in. If for any reason they have to change the day, they'll give you $500. If anyone smokes or uses tobacco or swears while they're on your property, believe it or not, they'll give you $500. And the reason they hardly have to pay anything out, but the reason the owner of the company is doing that is because he wants that information. Not so he can yell at his people, but he can say, "What broke down in the system here? Why did we have to reschedule? Why are we hiring these, or how are we training these people not to behave professionally around our customers?" Things like that. So they really understand that it's this customer experience you deliver. And just a word of caution to marketers. Let's say the boss is listening to this show, or they read it on an in-flight magazine and they come in on Monday and say, okay, we're all about customer experience. And just so you know, that's called Management by In-Flight magazine. They then turn to the marketing person and say, all right, you're in charge of marketing. You're in charge of customer experience. If you're a marketer, you need to say no. Because you don't control all that, and unless that boss is dead serious about making this work, they're going to say, we tried customer experience, doesn't work. And you can't, it's not like you can control deliveries, or there's so much the marketer doesn't control there. So it kind of goes back to helping your company understand that your customer experience is really much more important. And the reason why, for those that are doubting Thomases, is that in the past, you could tell 10 of your neighbors or whatever if you had a bad experience with a customer or with a company. But now you can tell the world. Everybody has a megaphone. You can write a song about how United Airlines breaks guitars and won't refund your money, and it decreases the value of that company's stock by 10%, which was billions of dollars. Everybody, that's why it used to be buyer beware, caveat emptor. Now it's seller beware, because even if your customer didn't have a bad experience, they can go tell everyone. So it's changing the way companies are running. It's changing governments. Everyone has a megaphone now, and if it's compelling enough, a lot more people are going to find out about it. Just think about reviews. So that was the third one, is about the customer experience. And so I think some people that watch this talk maybe thought, oh gosh, there's so much more for me to do, but hopefully folks were inspired, and maybe some of their bosses can understand that the David Packard quote.
Yeah, absolutely. And customer experience, it's got to be customer. It's got to be company wide. It just has to be, because every touch point is crucial.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there was a book on the show called Mean People Suck. It was the 250th episode by Michael Brenner. It was all about empathy. And he had this smart idea. You know how an organizational chart might look for a business,
Mm-hmm.
where it's got like a box at the top and a line down, and then it goes to 2 boxes and then to 3 boxes. He said that's part of the reason why customer experience is so hard for companies. And he proposed a very smart new approach to the org chart. And basically at the center is the customer. And then every line and box needs to somehow be connected into how does it impact the customer. And the smarter companies are starting to realize that even accounting, finance, billing, delivery, returns, those are all customer facing departments, even though they might not have thought of themselves that way. And there was another book called on the show called Nincompoopery: Why Your Customers Hate You and How to Fix That. And he used this term throughout the book that was very funny. He called, let's say you still have some non-customer facing departments, customer free zones. I think that's what he called it. Customer free zones. You better not have any more customer free zones, because if people think that, yeah, I don't have to deal with the customer. Yeah, you might actually be more customer facing than you realize.
I love the fact that you put the customer in the center, and then there's lines going to everybody. And who isn't going to want to be close to that customer? The further away, it's almost like the less relevant you are. You're like, no, put me closer to the customer.
And less job security.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just the connotation of having that written down somewhere. That's genius.
Well, it's also a way for the leadership to say, look, guys, it really needs to be about the customer. And if they can just do that in the way they operate and the way they think, they're going to be more successful.
Mm-hmm. So, Douglas, you've given so much value so far, and with all the chats that I have with my amazing guests, I finish on quickfire questions. So are you ready for these?
Yes, except what's the last thing you Googled? Oh, gosh. I'll have to think about that. Well, actually, can't we look through the history? Maybe I don't want to answer that. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, let me see here. Well, I'm giving away what one of them was.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with that.
Yeah.
What was the last thing you Googled?
I'm trying to see. Oh, it was about the Senate Majority Leader in the United States. There's an impeachment going on, which is this trial and of the president, and the head of the Senate Majority Leader is named Mitch McConnell, and he is sometimes known as Cocaine Mitch, not because I don't think he uses cocaine, but it was based on some funny TV commercial that a candidate had who was running in a recent Senate campaign. And I told a couple colleagues here about that, and they weren't familiar with the whole Cocaine Mitch thing. So I looked at the guy's name was Don Blankenship, Cocaine Mitch. It was a really funny ad, and the guy, fortunately, he lost, but it was a bit terrifying. So that was the last thing I Googled. I know that was your second question. I'm sorry. So
no, yeah, absolutely fine. When you started talking about the Senate and impeachment, I thought this is just going to be the most boring answer we've ever had for that question.
Yeah.
You turned it around quite well.
Well, thank you. And normally I am told how boring I am. So but that was just today.
And that's when you start drinking the scotch.
That's right. That's right.
Cool. I hate to ask this question, but what is your go-to source of information?
Well, wouldn't it be Google?
Well, I thought it was going to be books, but.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, the first one. Well, okay. Yeah. I guess you're right. I don't know why you would have thought that, because it didn't occur to me, but it's sort of like if I've read about a book about a particular topic, I end up not reading a whole lot about it, like on other blogs and things, because I feel like I kind of got it. I can certainly keep up by reading blogs and other things like that. But yeah, I guess rather than go-to source, yeah, it would be sort of the definitive source. However, there are a lot of topics that aren't books aren't written about necessarily. So
Cool. So if you could tell your 10-year-old self one thing, what would it be?
Oh, I would think it would be beware of old guys claiming to be the future me.
Brilliant. I love it. Final two questions, probably the most important two questions of this whole chat. The first one is, can you judge a book by its cover?
Well, whether you can or can't, I certainly do. And I'm sorry, but it forms an impression. And, one thing I've learned from books is that 90% of what's going on in the brain is subconscious. You don't even know what's going on there. A lot of it has to do with keeping ourselves alive and, being more like cavemen. But I think that it certainly helps. There's a one particular publisher, and they must not even be going on Fiverr to get their book covers designed, because I think even I could do better. I'm not a graphic designer. And over time, I've read enough of their books, and I'm thinking, do you guys even have editors? So it doesn't hurt.
Absolutely. Final question, most important question. If people want to find the Marketing Book Podcast, find out more about yourself and what you do and your other company, where should they go?
Well, ideally, it would be any fine watering hole in Liverpool.
Yes.
But since I've never been to Liverpool, but one of these days I'm going to get there.
Get yourself over. You will not regret it.
Oh, I know. I already looked it up on Wikipedia, and I'm thinking, man, what a cool place to go to. And not just because of the Beatles, but there's so many museums and that sort of thing. And then, of course, you would be required to take me to a Liverpool game.
Yeah, obviously.
Or match. I'm sorry, match. The marketingbookpodcast.com is where they can find the podcast section of our website. I'm on LinkedIn, and I love connecting with folks on LinkedIn and then talking back and forth where I'm able to recommend something that's going to help save them time. But connect with me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, they can go to marketingbookpodcast.com to find the podcast and where they can subscribe to it. On Twitter, on Twitter, I am Marketing Book, but I don't really go on Twitter that much anymore. It's just anyway. So that's how they can find me. And my company website is salesartillery.com.
Love it, Douglas. Thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. And let me know about those bookmarks. Anybody wants one?